much waiting, a lot of anxiety, and some dude getting his boat stuck somewhere, we finally have our bumper. This is the Dash Predator bar from Australia, which the company in Colorado called Nisstec organized a group buy for everybody in the US. I believe they also did a little bit of research to see what was different between the Patrols and the Armadas. So this should bolt right up, but we'll see about that. This didn't really come with any instructions. All we got was a little, basically a packing slip with the general indication of where the parts go. So yeah. Luckily Dash has a video on how to install it on a Patrol, but like I said, the Patrol is not the same as an Armada, so there's some differences between the kits. And the video he did isn't all that detailed, so I guess that's where we come in. First of all, we gotta get all the stock stuff off. I guess we can just start there. You first wanna remove the cooling panel from the top of the bumper, and it's gonna have these little push clips, which if you've had a Nissan at all before, you'll know that you're just gonna break half of these off anyway. So just stick a screwdriver in there and pry it out. And repeat like 50 more times. Now's a good time to disconnect your camera, if you have one. So we have all the top little push clips off, and it looks like there's some tabs at the bottom holding the grill in, and I guess you're just supposed to yank it off. I don't really see anything else holding it to the truck. All these holes are fake, what the hell? Right. I get my finger stuck in here.
3 weeks later.
Feels like I did. These are the tabs that are locked into the bumper. Okay, so that was difficult. I found that prying on the very corner of the grill was the best way to get it started. There's a clip that goes right beside the headlight, and once you get that apart, then you can fit more of your hand behind it and start working down. So now we got more of these little push clips, and this is the camera connector that I mentioned. So now we have the front of the bumper loosened up. So now I probably have to disconnect the side, which if you have these little fender flares, makes it a little more complicated. And why the hell is there a torch bit on that? So if you have these fender flares, apparently these two screws on the bottom are T20 Torx bits. That complicates things unnecessarily. I can't even get a screwdriver on here. Okay, then we got a 10mm bolt at the bottom. The rest of this should be held on just by some like push clips, I think. So we got 2 more 10mm bolts down here, and then the fender liner should be loose from the bumper. Alright, so once you break this whole thing off, there should be a 10mm bolt that holds the bumper to the fender. And then we can move to the bottom. Okay, so if you want to not break these clips, you can reach up from behind and push them out while you're pulling on it. But this gets cut off and thrown in the trash anyway, so it shouldn't matter. So once you get the bumper separated a bit, you disconnect the fog lights and this other harness that's for the parking sensors. And there you go. So we're going to remove all the parking sensors. So I want to take all these fog lights out and see if there's any way we can reuse them in the dash bumper. It doesn't really have this kind of mounting mechanism, but because this is like just a little push tab that holds it in with one screw on the back, we might be able to just make something and see if we can get it to stay there. Alright, so once you have the bumper off, you can remove these little guides for the air, I guess. And surprise, there's more push clips. I'm not sure if I have to take this off or not, because I know this front bumper part has to come off, and this is bolted to that, but it's also bolted on way back there, so I'm assuming that has to come out. Guess what? I found more push clips. So the radar sensor is attached from the backside with two 10mm bolts. I'm just gonna leave this here for now. And this is our camera plug. The last thing I believe you gotta remove is this top support here. That's what held up the grill. And there's 10mm bolts holding it from the top, but I know we have to remove the L brackets that hold it on too, so might as well leave that part together and unbolt these bottom 6 bolts. So surprise, there's actually 2 more bolts. One on each side behind the headlight here, so 6 bolts on the bottom and these 2 on the top. So I'm just gonna get this radar sensor here out of the way. I'm not cutting the clips, by the way, I'm just unhooking them. Alright, so the first piece we're gonna put on is this giant metal piece. This is where your winch goes if you have one. We don't at the moment, but we may get one in the future. This should line up with these holes or these studs from the stock bumper or frame rails. It's even got a hole on the inside here for the 4th stud on the frame rail. Got all the nuts in place, just keeping it from falling off. You want to try and like center it as best as you can right now, so it makes everything else easier. Usually I wouldn't say to tighten everything down until everything's like together, but I don't think you'll be able to get to these with everything else on top. And I mean, if they're centered, that should be where they're supposed to go, assuming your truck's not crashed or something. So I'm gonna tighten these down right now and see if that works out. So side note, I'm reusing the factory hardware wherever I can, just because I trust the factory stuff more than some Chinese bolts and nuts that came with this. I think it's good. So there's 3 L brackets that it's really similar to the factory support that was here. There's 2 that go on each side. These 2 are identical, so it doesn't matter which way you put them. This middle one though is a little bit longer. I'm pretty sure that part is what goes out facing this way. And we're gonna reuse our factory bolts here. So it looks like they included a piece that'll secure the bottom edge of the grill. It lines up with these 4 tabs here at the bottom. This will help because the whole thing is like slotted, so you can bolt it wherever you need to. So I'm going to use this bracket that clips onto the grill to line up this bottom plate. So I'm just going to kind of put the grill back. Now loosen all the bolts holding these L brackets up. Okay, so now that we have our appropriate height for the center section, we leveled the sides based on that. And that should be where it goes, so we can tighten it down now. So once again, since we don't have any instructions, I have no idea how this goes. So I'm gonna guess that this is wrong. So this is probably how it goes. Let's try that. The shape of these pieces looks suspiciously familiar, so that's probably where they go. So the centerpiece has these square holes at the bottom, and that's what these clip-in nuts are for. And they kind of go in from the inside and just kind of get pushed in place, I think. Alright, so one of the biggest issues we're facing here with our install is this nice little black box here. This is the radar sensor for the adaptive cruise control. And these bars are set up for, I guess, a base model Patrol, which doesn't have any of this fancy stuff. The parking sensors are another thing that we're gonna have to like retrofit. This is a pretty big feature on the Armadas, and like one of the key things that we were looking for when we bought it. So I don't know exactly, just want to toss this out, especially because it says don't drop. There's not a whole lot of options as to where to put it. The ideal place is exactly where the winch is supposed to go. I could put it there. We don't have a winch right now, but we're probably going to want to get one later. We're going to leave that as it is for now. Ideally, it would go down here somewhere. Since we're raising the truck quite a bit, putting it a little lower is probably more closer to where it would have been from the factory, you know, height-wise from the road or whatever. There's just not a whole lot of room down here either, and you wouldn't want it hanging down where it's gonna get like smacked by a rock or something. The other option, which I kind of think is the better option, is to cut this square out and have it recessed in there somehow. But I don't really have a way to make the cuts that precise. We're probably gonna end up having to like repaint it or repowder coat the area or something. It's just a pain in the ass. So the easiest thing, and what everybody else is probably likely to do, is just to mount it behind the grill up here. I also don't think this is gonna work all that well. And this is the mounting bracket for it. So I've been just leaving this on my toolbox just so it doesn't get banged up or anything. But if we place it here, we'll probably end up cutting most of this off and just mounting it to these bolts here. For one, the factory camera is right in front here. And we're also gonna be adding kind of like a trophy truck bull bar with some like rally style driving lights. And that's all gonna be in front of this. So that's the main reason I don't think this is gonna be a good place for it. We're just gonna try this out first and see if it'll work. Because if it does, then that's the easiest solution for everybody else, is just mount it here and it'll be behind your grill, which from the factory, the bumper has a plastic cover that sits in front of it. So I don't think some plastic sitting in front should be a big issue for it. The best solution for us is, I think, when we have the rally light setup made, is probably just mounting it with the rally lights and then making some kind of like cover for it. Because the tube's gonna sit about here and then come across, and then the lights are gonna be stacked in the middle. So we could probably just mount this in between the two lower lights and maybe just angle it down, or I don't know. Somebody also told us that the sensor has to be recalibrated if you move it or unplug it. I don't believe that's the case. I think it just has to be aligned, you know, as far as to point out directly in front of the vehicle and not like be off at an angle pointing into incoming traffic or something, because that would definitely cause issues. I mean, if we have to get it like recalibrated or something, then that's something we'll fill you guys in on when we get there. But I think we should be fine just moving it and making sure it's level and plumb with everything else. Let's just get started trying to put it here and see how that works. Okay, so I cut off the main portion that mounts it to the stock bumper, and the little mounting tabs that hold the wire, and it should fit pretty well right here. I'll just need to drill a couple of holes for those bolts, and we'll just try that out. So 3/8 would be 6/16, so it's half of 6/16. 3/16. Yeah, I was right.
I'm good at numbers.
Okay, so we got our holes drilled here, and they line up pretty well with the bracket here for the bumper, but it's got this lip on the back that isn't gonna let it really seat properly. So I'm gonna use these two large nuts. There's a joke to be made there. Space it up a bit. Luckily the bolts that they supplied for this part are pretty long, and they just reach with all this stuff in the middle. So that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to make sure it's straight. Now we should check and see if this even fits over the grill. Looks pretty good. So if you have the 360 parking camera, you're gonna have a front camera here. This bracket comes straight out and would have caused problems with the sensor being where it is. So I just bent it up to be out of the way. Again, this is another thing, I'm not sure if it's gonna interfere with the radar, but we'll find out. Okay, so now that we're pretty happy with this for now, we can go ahead and bolt down this support bracket here, and just like everything else on this bumper, it's slotted, so you got a little bit of movement left and right. So I'm just trying to center it based on where the edges of the brackets are, and then obviously make sure this is as level as you can get it with the rest of the frame. You can kind of see the radiator support and the lower winch mount, so that's pretty much what I'm trying to make it parallel with. All right, so now that's all bolted together. You can put this thing back
very carefully.
Held on with 4 10mm nuts on the back. And then connect the plug back. And hopefully it doesn't yell at us. Fingers crossed. So another little issue in making this bar fit an Armada as opposed to Patrol is the headlights need to be supported from this inner bolt hole, which this bar doesn't have a mounting point for. So I'm gonna try and make a little bracket out of this scrap aluminum that I have here just to hold up the headlight. And it should be pretty easy. It's just drilling a couple holes and putting some bolts in there. All right, so we got the little bracket that we made up here. This is 3/16 aluminum, and the 2 bolt holes are 10mm. I don't know what that is in standard. I just happen to have a 10mm drill bit, and that's what size the holes are in the rest of the thing. This is a little too thick, but it's the best thing I had laying around. So you'd probably be better off with like 1/8 inch or so, because when you put it in place, it lifts up the headlight a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but this shouldn't cause too much of an issue. But just like everything else with my builds, we'll find out later and fix it. All right, so we got both headlight brackets in place. As you can see, this baby can hold so much spaghetti. So I think we're ready to move on. So on this piece, we have some more of these captive nut things, and you need to check which one of these might be too tight, because they don't really seem to fit in place properly. Like, it looks like those little ears are supposed to go around the sheet metal you're supposed to be installing it in, but they don't really, it's like this is too thick or something. And on some of them, you can't get the bolt through because of that. On some of them, it's fine, but on others, it's in the way like that. So what I've been doing is just getting a screwdriver and kind of spreading them apart. Just enough so you have room to get the bolt in. And then to mount these pieces to the center portion, we have these nuts, which we don't seem to have enough of. There's 4 bolt holes on each side of these side pieces, but we only have 4 bolts left that seem to be big enough for this. So I guess we'll just use 2 for now. And it actually looks like we might need to cut that out of the way first. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and cut the fender liner out of the way. And I'm just using a nice new razor blade. You should be enough to get it out of the way. So we're going to be cleaning up the fender line that we cut earlier, and for that I'm going to be using this mini pneumatic belt sander. I got this on Amazon for maybe like 50 bucks, just because I've seen somebody use it when they install body kits. Nakayakira desho ne. Alright, so now we should be able to put this thing in place. Okay, so I had to remove this bracket to get this thing to sit where I want it. I had to move it around quite a bit, that's why it's a good thing to leave all the main mounting bolts a little loose. Like, they're not completely flopping around, they're just tight enough to provide a little bit of friction. That way you can just nudge everything into place. But these are all slotted, like I said, like everything else on this thing. And so you don't really know what position it needs to be in, especially not until you get this where you like it. So I took it off, we got this where it needs to go. I wasn't quite sure which orientation it goes in, but the part that's bent, that has a little crease on it, that's the part that bolts to the main winch cradle down here. And then Then you can just line it up to match where you have your side piece here. So we're just gonna try and bolt it down now. Alright, so putting on the passenger side now. We're quite a few bolts short. There's supposed to be 4 large bolts for that bracket and 4 large bolts to join this piece to the center section. And we only got 2 bolts left. Alright, so we got our bumper completely mocked up. Now we can go ahead and try to figure out where the parking sensors are gonna go. So on the stock bumper, the parking sensors are held on by these little clips here. I thought they were part of the bumper at first, but I was prying on one and it looks like it's just glued on. So what I did was just come at it with the razor blade and just kept cutting the glue as I'm pulling it up. And that seems to be working pretty easily. So yeah. This will make it a lot simpler. That way you can just clean off some of the old, it looks like just 3M double-sided tape. Just clean some of this off and put some new tape on there and put it behind the dash bumper. All right, so we have the stock harness here with the parking sensors on it. And I just want to see about where this is gonna reach to. So it looks like we need to put one sensor about at each corner here from the winch area. And then probably one under each headlight. Yeah, that's about where the stock ones were, is under the headlights. So we can just mark this up and drill some holes that we can't take back. Okay, so I got all the areas masked off where I think the sensors need to go. I'll just put a tape in the middle to mark out the center line. And it looks like the 2 center sensors are meant to go about 2 feet apart. So that makes it kind of easy if we just measure 1 foot to each side. Okay, so now we have our marks 2 feet apart. And we need to choose where to center it. And we'll probably just go with the center of this area here. That's about 2.5 inches. So we'll mark it at 1 1/4. And for these outer ones, I'm not really sure where to center it off of. Probably just go based on this mesh area here in the bumper. Just use half of that. This is about 5 inches. So we can mark that at 2.5. And our height's probably gonna be the same. No, actually it's 2 inches here, so we'll mark that at 1 inch. I'll do the same over here. So 1 foot to each side. Okay, so we got our drill locations marked up. And actually decided to lower them a little bit because just from standing back and looking at it, it didn't look good to the eye for some reason. And I think it's because I was measuring from the top of the curve here. This has got a pretty big radius, so it's hard to like really choose a place to measure from. But I was measuring from like up here and centering it off that, and it looked weird. So I decided to measure based on the end of this radius. That was about 2 inches from where the flat area starts. And so I centered it based on that, and it just looks better. So I think I'm gonna go with that. Before you start drilling, you always want to mark out your location with the center punch, so your drill doesn't wander around and screw it up for you. I'm also just gonna do center 2 first, get these mounted in place, and then see how much slack we have to work with on the ends. Because I think it'll be better to move the outer ones closer to the corners. The corner of the bumper is what protrudes the furthest out, so I think it'd be better to have the sensor closer to that. That way you know if that corner is getting close to something, then it's actually that corner that's gonna hit, and not like the center like under the headlight here, and then you're actually like already hitting something with the corner of the bumper. We need to get these mounted first to see where the outer ones are gonna land. Oh, and I also have the step drill bit here marked out for 11/16. The sensors measure a little bit bigger than that, but they have a little like squishy gasket around them. So I'm hoping that's enough to let it fit into a slightly smaller hole. I center punched it and it still walked a little bit. I guess that's because the powder coating was pretty thick. The aluminum here is actually pretty thick too. It's like 3/16 or so. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Repeat 3 more times. All right, so for this part, I just cleaned off all the old double-sided tape, and we're just gonna put some new, this is Gorilla brand double-sided tape, but you can use 3M or whatever you have. Okay, so now I disconnected one of the sensors from the harness, and we're just gonna put it back in the clip here. And I removed the little plastic from the double-sided tape, and we're just gonna reach from the back and push it through. I left a little gasket in there, hoping that'll make it a little easier. Yeah, that'll work.
Oh yes, it's very nice.
All right, so we got everything pretty much where it needs to go. I spent entirely too much time last night trying to get this thing to line up and get all the body gaps right. And it's about as close as it's gonna get. Whatever. I hate things that are slotted everywhere. I took this piece off of the grill, and we're gonna bolt this in place because it's probably gonna be a pain in the ass to try and bolt it with the grill in place. So we're gonna do that right now. I also ran the harness for the parking sensors, and we got all those installed. Probably gonna touch this up with some black paint or something because you can see some of the aluminum showing through. So now we're pretty much in the home stretch. Just need to get this bolted on, and then we can put on the skid plate parts on the bottom. All right. So we have a few pieces left over, and they're kind of optional. They include this light bar mount and this mount for like spotlights and stuff, which goes there. So you have the option of this one or that one. We're not going to be using these. I'm going to build something else. There's also these bits here. These go here, and then you bolt your license plate to that. We're not required to have a front license plate, so we're not going to use this. But if your state requires you to have a front plate, then that's what this is for. It's like this so that if you have a winch installed, the plate will flip up out of the way, and you can access your winch from there. Yeah, we don't need those. So other than that, we're done. Like I said, we have something else planned for like the light setup on this. So that's gonna be a whole other video because I think this one's already gonna be pretty long. But we felt we had to do a pretty thorough breakdown of how to install this thing since nobody else has really yet. So yeah, it's time for a test drive. Alright, so we finished installing the bumper, and we've been driving it around for a couple days just to make sure nothing falls off or whatever. My general opinion so far is very on the fence. The fit and quality is kind of very mid, for lack of a better word. Like, it's not horrible, but it's not great either. Like, every single bolt hole on this thing is slotted, which, yeah, you could argue so you can like dial in your fitment to get it just where you want it. And yeah, we were able to get it to fit pretty well. But in my opinion, that's just to cover up, you know, manufacturing imperfections and stuff. But it does look really good, and I feel like that's kind of what you're paying for, is that this is pretty much the best option we have for patrols and Armadas, especially in the US. I mean, we really only have really one other option, and that's the Calmini front bumper. And that one's $1,500, but it also does have provisions for the radar sensor and the parking sensors. And another option is the Smittybilt M1A2 bumper, which is probably more along the lines of this because it involves fab work. It's not really meant to go on an Armada or anything, but that's the bumper that Nissan used in their snow patrol build. I would assume you'd still have the same issues where you'd have to mount the parking sensors, find a place to put the radar sensor, but that one's $1,400. We paid $2,200 for this.
And at that price point, I kind of feel like we shouldn't have to fabricate anything, right? If I paid $1,400, I'd be much more open to having to make stuff work and figure it out, you know? But especially if like you're not very mechanically inclined, this might be a big roadblock for you. Like you might end up having to, you know, take it to the shop and have them do it. And then your costs are gonna go through the roof at that point. So if you're in the market for a bumper for your Armada and you're looking at the Dash OffRoad one, I would probably say to wait it out a little bit longer and see if they're gonna address some of the issues or differences between the Armadas. Because as it stands, you probably need to fabricate a fair amount of stuff and relocate your if you have a radar sensor for the adaptive cruise control and parking sensors. Just in relocating the sensor, that brings forth a few other issues in getting it to work. Because right now it works, but it doesn't work as well as it did stock. If you're just driving down the road and you set your cruise control, like it'll work fine. It'll still hold your speed at what you set it and everything. But I noticed when you set it to hold your distance from another car, because it'll have the furthest, middle, and closest range, and I would always set it to the closest just because I felt that the furthest distance was like way too far away, and then you're just letting people like cut you off at that point. But now if I set it to the closest, it's damn near tailgating the person in front of you, so that's not ideal. And also if you're already at speed and let's say somebody just turned onto the road, the sensor won't see them until you're already pretty close, and then it kind of slams on the brakes, and that's a little scary. So I think that also has something to do with our ride height, because after we installed the suspension, I noticed that the rear was a ½ inch to 1 inch lower than the front. So that makes me think that the whole vehicle is pointed slightly up, which would make sense that the radar sensor is reading too high up, because if it's pointing up and you're coming up on somebody, it would make sense that it's not seeing them until you're already fairly close. So what I want to do is probably just add some washers to the way that I mounted it and try to tilt it down a little bit and see if I can get it to read properly. Because that scenario would be the best for anybody installing this, because it's the simplest solution. Because the grill and the plastic in the area doesn't seem to interfere with it. Metal does seem to have an effect on it. For example, your only other options would be like to put it where your winch is mounted, which isn't ideal, because if you have a winch, then obviously you really can't mount it there. But if you don't plan on going off road or anything like that, then yeah, I suppose that's an option. You could mount it inside, but then you'd have to cut a hole for the sensor to see out of, because the slot for the winch cable just isn't going to be enough for it to see. And you could mount it in front, which I guess would probably be the better option, but then you'd have to like maybe take the cover from the factory bumper and find a way to put that in front, because obviously you don't want the sensor, you know, getting rocks kicked up and hitting it and stuff, because apparently they're pretty sensitive. I mean, it has a big sticker on the side that says "Don't drop." Other than that, the only other place to mount it would be the hole that's cut out in the center of the bumper, which I think is meant for you to access your winch clutch or something like that. But again, that would involve a fair amount of work, because you'd have to cut out the area to be a little larger to fit the sensor and for it to see out of. I mean, that's a very prominent area right in front of the bumper, so you'd have to do that pretty cleanly. We're going to be addressing it a different way, probably incorporating it into our off-road lights and our bull bar and something like that. But we'll see when we get there. That's about where we're going to call it for this video, because it's already getting pretty long. And we'd like to thank you for sticking with us, and stay tuned for the next video.